Welcome back to our third of 3 videos where we speak with medical genius James Sloane. Today we're talking about female hormones, phytoestrogens, and we're going to start with the question, are bioidentical hormones really bioidentical?
I've never really liked that term because there is no way to prove that they're actually bioidentical, because by bioidentical they're basically sitting there saying that they're exactly the same structure as our naturally occurring hormones. The problem is that there's no way to determine that, because even a slight change in bond angle, for example, can create something new. Right. Like we know water, for example, water H2O, and you have this certain structure, but those bond angles can actually change the properties of the water. There's really no way to sit there and tell, like I said, is this bioidentical hormone identical to naturally occurring hormones? Because there are variations. Even something like sugar, you got different forms of glucose. And again, our glucose, fructose, galactose are all C6H12O6. They're all the same exact atoms, but why are they different sugars? Because there's changes in the structure. So there really is no way to tell that it's truly bioidentical. There's also not only bioidentical, there's also natural derived hormones like Premarin, for example. The
Pregnant mare's urine.
Yeah.
That's what it stands for. Pregnant mare's urine.
Yeah. And that is actually around 3,000 times stronger than the body's own estrogen, which is why we see women ballooning up and stuff when they start on the estrogen replacement therapy, because estrogen will cause fat cell enlargement, and it also suppresses the thyroid. So you got a couple different issues going on there. So you got this very, very powerful estrogen going into the body, and it overwhelms the system, and it creates lots of weight.
We're hitting key here with a lot of women. Weight gain, hormone changes, cancer. Most of the cancer that women get are hormone driven, right? Breast, ovarian, cervical.
Yeah, I'm glad you said driven and not caused, because that's a big misconception I hear a lot. People think that the hormones cause the cancer. They don't cause the cancer. The cancers are actually viral in origin. Like we know breast cancer is caused from there's 3 or 4 different viruses, including human papillomaviruses, mammary mouse carcinoma, tumor-like virus is another one. I think the JC virus, I think, was the other one. So anyway, there's multiple viruses that cause breast cancer. We know that uterine vaginal cancer, all those are caused from human papillomaviruses, and so on and so forth. So the role that these hormones play is that they were found to activate the cancer viruses. So the hormone itself doesn't cause the cancer. If that were the case, we'd all have cancer, because even men have estrogen and progesterone. Right. And so it requires that virus, and then the activation of the virus is what actually causes the cancer.
HPV are at a higher risk.
Mm-hmm.
There's the issue of getting the virus, and then there's the issue of feeding the conditions that make the virus stronger and spread. Even if you have something, it doesn't mean that there's nothing you can do, right? You can totally change the way things are going to play out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's as far as getting the viruses, there's different reasons. It could be sexually transmitted. There's possibly skin transmission. Like we know that skin cancer is not caused from sunlight. In fact, sunlight produces vitamin D, which is anti-cancer. Exactly. Yeah. But it's a human papillomavirus that was in the skin, and the medical studies found that the sunlight activates the human papillomavirus in the skin. So I wouldn't consider the skin HPV be sexually transmitted. It's probably, again, something contact. So it's the hormones, though, are actually activating it. So we got estrogen will activate certain viruses. It's well known that progesterone will activate human papillomaviruses, because a lot of these women think, I got elevated estrogen, and so therefore I got to take this progesterone, and they're actually creating more problems.
Well, it's like stress activates herpes and things like that.
Yeah, that's immune suppression.
But estrogen, there's a direct correlation of estrogen and female cancers and fat, and the fatter you are, the more estrogen you're probably dealing with.
Right.
They kind of feed each other, and then you have insulin issues, and now you're back to diabetes again. That was our last thing. So there's a big correlation between the amount of extra fat you have and diabetes. And again, that's calories, diet, how much movement you have in your body. Most people, they sit all day. They say, how come the French are thin? They eat cheese and bread and stuff. Well, yeah, most of them don't drive cars. They ride bicycles, they walk, they move their body. Even if you eat good food and you have too much of it, you can still get fat.
exactly. Yeah, so there's a lot of different factors involved in the weight gain. Like even diabetes can cause weight gain because you got the insulin response. Insulin causes fat deposits and so on. So there's no single answer to weight gain, weight loss. But getting back to the hormones real quick, one of the most common misconceptions I hear with women is they'll sit there and say, oh, I had a hysterectomy. I don't have hormones anymore. It's like, yes, you do still have
hormones. Come from all kinds of things. Lots of body parts make hormones.
If the ovaries either removed or if they shut down at menopause, then your adrenal glands become your secondary source of the hormones. The third source would be fat cells. So the more fat cells you have, the more estrogen you produce. And this gets into, again, that vicious cycle because estrogen suppresses the thyroid, and thyroid suppression can cause weight gain, so therefore you produce more body fat, producing more estrogen, suppressing the thyroid more. And then your bones and your brain actually produce estrogen as well in small amounts.
There's a lot of people, women, who barely eat. They go, I'm eating healthy, I'm eating very little, and yet I have all this weight.
Yeah, that could be, again, several things. Like, let's say you start developing the insulin resistance we talked about last time. The insulin resistance is going to create a higher spike in the insulin levels because your pancreas is, again, responding directly to your blood sugar levels. So if you're not getting that blood sugar down, the pancreas is like, oh, the blood sugar is still too high, let me kick out more insulin. The insulin gets kicked out, and that causes fat more fat production. And then in turn, the fat's also going to, again, suppress your thyroid due to the estrogen, and then you're going to end up with more weight. So it can come in different factors. So that can be one. There's also stress. Stress releases cortisol. Cortisol will cause an elevation of blood sugar, which again causes an insulin spike, causes fat deposition. And depending on if you're male or female, you can put fat in different areas. Like men tend to, around the belly. And
So a lot of women are afraid of eating plants because they've been told that they contain phytoestrogens, and phytoestrogens, they hear estrogen in that word and they go, oh, I can't have estrogen. Plant estrogens are 1,000 times weaker than...
Yeah, I've been explaining this for so long to people, trying to get them to understand the concept, because you have the fear mongers like Mercola, for example, are always sitting there saying, oh, soy, it's got the equivalent of 5 birth control pills, which is total nonsense. He pushes this thing and people start to think, oh, all estrogens are bad. They're not. A phytoestrogen is a plant-based estrogen. Now, they're found in all plants.
Right.
Doesn't matter what it is. All the plants we consume have phytoestrogens, but phytoestrogens are a very, very weak estrogenic compound. They're on average 200 to 400 times weaker than the body's own estrogen, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because what will happen, again, we go back to these receptors again. Almost everything in the body works on receptors. Something has to latch onto a receptor to activate a cell or to do this or that. So what will happen with phytoestrogens is these phytoestrogens lock up these estrogen receptors, so when a stronger estrogen comes along, either our body's own estrogen, estrogens from meats or dairy, which again are way, way stronger than
plastic water bottles.
Yeah, those are what we call xenoestrogens, which are, a lot of them are man-made estrogens. So yeah, you get, certain plastic water bottles, particularly polycarbonate, contain BPA, which is a very strong xenoestrogen. Then we got dioxin, DDT, PCB, phthalates, which are used as plasticizers for like baby bottle nipples and teething rings. I mean, they're right there, they're feeding these kids
No
large.
wonder why the babies are getting fat.
Yeah. So yeah, there's many different forms of and a lot of these xenoestrogens are actually extremely stable. Like DDT, for example, will last somewhere around 100 years in the soil. So even though it's not in use in the United States anymore, it doesn't mean it's gone. It's still there. And dioxins are being kicked out all the time by various industries, particularly paper mills, and they dump this garbage into the waterways. So people that are downstream from these rivers and stuff are being exposed to large amounts of dioxins. You got certain herbicides and pesticides from farms.
Non-organic foods. Basically anything in the grocery store that you buy in a box, a bottle, a bag, or a jar is going to have something in there that's estrogenic probably. But anyway, so to explain to people, like let's say there's seats on a bus, right? The bus analogy. Phytoestrogens come in, they sit in all the seats, and now here come the big bad estrogens. Well, there's no seats left.
Exactly.
So they can't sit down. And that's the point. Phytoestrogens, all they do is fill up estrogen receptors, but that doesn't mean they are heavy-duty estrogens. They just say this seat is taken. but they don't really affect your body in a bad way.
Yeah, they're exerting an extremely weak estrogenic effect, but at the same time they're blocking the dangerous actions of the stronger estrogens. And if they so in other words, like again dioxin or something like that, some of these xenoestrogens can be 100,000 times stronger than the body's own estrogen. You don't want those latched on those receptors. So these phytoestrogens will lock that up. That's why phytoestrogens are so commonly used in anti-cancer treatment. Red clover, for example, has 4 phytoestrogens in it. Soy actually has a good level of phytoestrogens, which again are anti-cancer. Or you look at the Budwig diet, it includes flaxseed. Flaxseed's around 4 times higher
than soy.
in phytoestrogens.
Yeah, people have this fear of soy. They think it's like this bad estrogen. You got to get organic soy, but not all. Soy in its natural organic state is not really a bad thing, and fermented soy is even better. I mean, that's like the best.
You got people like Mercola, who I'm not a big fan of, and he's pushed all this nonsense because he works for Weston Price Foundation, and he's on their board, and so they're of course high meat, high dairy, and so therefore we got to bash soy. But it's funny because Mercola not only turns around and claims that flaxseed's a health food, even though it's almost 4 times higher in these same phytoestrogens he claims is the equivalent of 5 birth control pills, but he also sells resveratrol. Resveratrol is also used as an anti-cancer agent, and it is a phytoestrogen.
Yeah, well, everything's a phytoestrogen.
Yeah, so it's a concentrated phytoestrogen at that. So there's a lot of misconceptions on that, but the phytoestrogens are actually very, very beneficial because again they help to balance out the estrogen levels in the body. So they're not some estrogen that's going to kill you with cancer or this
right.
They actually help to balance
right.
by acting either as a very weak estrogen or antagonizing a stronger estrogen. So it is a balancer.
When women have hormone imbalances, the answer is not to get shots. It's not to get hormone replacement. It's to naturally start balancing your body by stopping the things that are bad for you and doing more good things that are good for you. And a lot of plant foods, fiber is really good because it's all connected. Your gut flora, your stomach acid, your fiber, your a clean liver, because your clean liver does 1,000 different things, including regulating hormones.
Right. The liver will break down excess estrogens into estrogen metabolites using methylation we discussed in the last video. And the estrogen metabolites are then broken down by our intestinal flora. If they're not broken down, they can be reabsorbed, adding to the estrogen load, and the fibers can bind the estrogen metabolites, and so therefore, the fibers play a big role as well. That's
actually an interesting thing is the binding properties. That's another. We'll talk about that. But getting back to female, or not just females, but any hormone issues is estrogen generally is associated with fat and cancer, and you want to regulate that and get it down. I mean, you don't want to be without estrogen. You want to have just the right amount and keep it there.
Yeah, and you also don't want to create a secondary imbalance by going progesterone, because a lot of these women, the progesterone was the big thing, especially back 10, 15 years ago.
Progesterone creams was like the big rage.
Yeah, and these women are going in. Of course, everybody was testing high in estrogen, so therefore you got to do the progesterone, and it was like nonsense because first of all, the hormone tests are garbage. They can detect free hormone, but hormones are stored by your fat cells. You cannot, unless you're doing a biopsy, you can't tell what is stored in the body. So what was happening is a lot of these women are going on these progesterone creams, and the progesterone was also stored in the body. So over a period of time, they were accumulating so much that a lot of women were ending up with like a 6-year supply of progesterone in their system. And progesterone has its own set of side effects. The side effects they were attributing to estrogen dominance, a lot of them were actually symptoms of progesterone dominance. For example, they were saying that the lack of libido was caused from estrogen dominance. And that's not true. Estrogen promotes receptivity in women, as where progesterone kills the sex drive. That's why we use chaste tree berry or Vitex, is to kill the libido. The monks would take the Vitex, and that would stimulate progesterone, and progesterone kills the libido. So all these women were like, oh, my sex drive's down, let me do some progesterone. Well, they killed their sex drive even further with the progesterone, on top of increasing their cancer risk. It causes hyperaggression, water retention. The mood swings, like with PMS, the mood swings have to do with progesterone, and the breast tenderness, all that was progesterone. Yeah. So you don't want to create a secondary imbalance to try to treat a first imbalance. That's
right, exactly.
You want to let your body do. Well, that kind of brings up an important point I always try to bring up to people so they understand this a little bit better, because the whole hormone replacement thing is a big pet peeve of mine. But when we're little kids and we're going into adolescence, we go through a hormone shift. You start getting the moody, you get the acne. It's just a transition. The body balances itself out. When a woman goes into menopause, or a man's going in the change life, because they can do it too. Anyways, we go into these changes, we have a secondary hormone shift, and if we provide not only the proper nutrition, but we just allow the time for the body to make that transition, we're fine.
Yeah.
But instead, they're like, no, I got to have this quick fix. So give me the hormones, and now they've thrown their body from this transition to like far and left field here. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. There's no quick instant anything. You gotta do the right thing.
And in fact, the women in Japan, they found on a traditional Japanese diet, they didn't go through the menopause symptoms. And the diet is very high in phytoestrogens. So again, they were balancing the hormones with their diet. Not only was it the phytoestrogens, which because they eat a lot of soy and stuff like that, but also there was some iodine in there too, because iodine does play a role in hormone balance because it's an estrogen antagonist. But that's very important that you have to watch your iodine intake. I tell people don't exceed 1 milligram per day because toxicity starts at 1.3 milligrams.
Well, don't do the drops. Do seaweed or something.
Yeah, that's the best way. It's very low, but a lot of people will go with the Lugol's or whatever. But I've seen there's groups out there who are promoting really excessive amounts of iodine, starting from 15 milligrams. I've seen them recommend all the way up to 300 milligrams of iodine per day, when toxicity starts at 1.3. And they'll try to argue and say, oh, but the average intake from the Japanese is 15 milligrams a day. It's like, no, that is not true. I've pulled up the studies on that, and they found that the average intake of the Japanese diet is only 3 milligrams per day of iodine. Now, the other thing we have to keep in mind here, because people say, well, even 3 milligrams, that's above your 1.3 milligram toxicity level. True, but you also got to remember that their diet, a lot of the iodine comes from seafoods that also contain...
It binds it.
Oh, yeah, it's not only binding, but antagonism, because in the seafoods where they get their iodine, there's also bromine, there's fluorine, there's chloride. All those are antagonistic to the iodine, so we're already dropping that level down. Now, if you look at what's the other big food in the Japanese diet, it's rice. Iodine binds to starches, preventing the absorption. So therefore, the actual amount of iodine they're getting in a daily basis is below 1 milligram per day.
Yeah, it's the whole thing, the whole picture, how each thing works together. That's why herbal formulas say, well, you have this ingredient here, and that ingredient makes you do this. Well, yeah, but what about all the other ingredients in there that counteract that, and they work together synergistically? Anyway, so yeah, this is an important subject for a lot of people, especially middle age. They want a quick fix, but they don't want to change their lifestyle and diet and their habits that got them there.
Remember, estrogen causes thyroid suppression. So this is true. Even phytoestrogens will cause thyroid suppression, which is why a lot of your goitrogenic foods and stuff will suppress thyroid. But again, it's really easy to counter because iodine counters the goitrogenic effect of the phytoestrogens. So again, taking an iodine source, like I do like seaweeds too. Which
seaweed. Well, this brings me to the subject I was going to bring up in the next thing, but to do it right now is a good point, and that is binding. People are so afraid of seaweed because of heavy metals, radiation, toxic stuff in the ocean. And this also goes with like nettles, for example, which can test high in lead and things like that because they bind to that and pull it out of the ground. See, people think, oh, that my body's going to get full of heavy metals and radiation and lead. They don't understand just because the substance has it in there doesn't mean it's going to release it into your body. Matter of fact, it's probably going to, if you have some of that already in your body, it's going to actually pull more of it out of your body, even though it has it in there.
Yeah, the Fukushima thing really set people off thinking, oh, you can't do seaweed. It wasn't just in the water. That radiation went in the air, went around the world, deposited in the soil. So you're gonna stop eating everything, number one. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then second of all, you got to remember too that radioactive isotopes are extremely, extremely heavy. If you look on the periodic table where all the radioactive elements are at, they're like way down here. it makes them very, very dense. Most of them are going to sink rather fast beyond the level of where your seaweeds grow. Seaweeds require light for photosynthesis. They can't grow in the deep ocean. They grow shallow. So I'm not really worried about that. And then the other thing, it goes back to the binding you were mentioning. In this case, it'd be alginates. All seaweeds contain algins, and these algins will bind metals and prevent the absorption. So they have a higher affinity for heavy metals, mercury, lead, so on, just like phytates, because phytates are another one that people freak out over.
Yeah, thanks to Gundry.
One of the phytates, inositol hexaphosphate, IP6, is used as a cancer treatment. So in that case, yes, it will pull nutrients from the body, but it has a higher affinity for heavy or toxic metals than healthy ones. So it's going to pull things like mercury. It's going to bind with free iron, which is linked to cancer because of the increased oxidation. And it's going to remove those from the body. It's not going to pull your chromium. It's not going to pull your magnesium or calcium.
Even if it was pulled out of water that had some heavy metals in it, and it has some in the plants, it's not going to release it.
Yeah,
the whole idea of binding is it's stuck in there, and it's not going to release it. It likes pulling that to itself. So it might be running through your body, but as it's running through your body, it's going to say, "Oh, wait, here's some more. Here's some more." It's going to grab even more on its way out. It's not going to release it into you, and that's what people have to understand. Like nettles, for example, is a great plant. Sometimes if you send it to a lab, it'll test high for lead, but that doesn't mean it's releasing that into your body.
Right, and also nettles high in silica. Silica displaces lead out of the body.
Yeah.
So that's another one. And another good example is about 5-10 years ago, whatever, it came out in the news about brown rice having arsenic.
Yes.
And that was, people were freaking out over brown rice and all this. But that's normal because the bran, the coating on the rice contains phytic acid again. And phytic acid has a very, very high affinity for heavy metals. So yeah, it will pick up arsenic from the soil, but being it's bound, that is not absorbed into the body, the bran's going to pass right through your body carrying that metal with it. So the arsenic never goes into your system.
So like rice bran solubles, which is...
B vitamins.
Could have some arsenic in it, but that doesn't mean it's getting released into your body.
Right.
Even though it sounds, people are not going to think, oh, that sounds way too scary for me. But rice in general, I mean, people would be dying left and right if that was the case, what you were saying. Like, all the Asians would be dead.
Exactly. Rice bran is actually really good for the hormones. I should bring that up too. It's one that helps to balance out the hormones. There's a chemical compound in there that has, again, kind of an estrogenic effect, and it will balance the hormones as well as...
What kind of rice are you talking about here?
The brown rice. It's the bran that helps to do that.
Better than white rice. Getting back to the seaweed real quick, and we're still on the subject of hormones here, but seaweed is just so good for all of this. I always bring up the example that Hiroshima, there were people, there might even still be a few of them left, who were alive till just recently, 60 years later, they're outliving the people that bombed them. How come these people that had an atomic bomb drop them outlived everyone else? Because they had radiation, they had heavy metals. Well, what was one of their big things in their diet? It was seaweed. Okay, so they ate seaweed from the Hiroshima Bay. Well, Hiroshima was radioactive. They were eating radioactive seaweed, and they outlived everyone else. Now, this is the power of binding. Of stuff. So they were pulling this stuff out of the ocean because this is what they normally eat. Nobody knew what radiation was back then. They just kept eating what they normally ate, and they outlived everybody, and they didn't die of cancer. So that's my point, is just because something is harvested from an area that might be testing not so great, doesn't mean it's going to affect you negatively because of the binding property. People need to understand what binding means. That's the whole reason I had to bring this up. Anyway, back to hormones, estrogens, middle age, hot flashes, night sweats, mood swings, and I think a big part of it, and that kind of, there is a correlation between diabetes, what you eat, how much you eat, how fat you are, all of that. Caffeine, stimulants, are you sleeping right, stress levels, relationships, what you see in the mirror stresses you out.
How well your adrenals are working, because again, your adrenals become your secondary source of hormones after the ovaries are either taken out or shut down, then your adrenals. So you got that factor. How well your liver's working, because your liver metabolizes the excess estrogens.
Yeah.
Flora.
Kara never experienced menopause. She just She didn't even know that it happened.
Yeah.
And so it's possible. And she eats nothing. I mean, she's the biggest plant eater in the world. And so if phytoestrogens are bad, she would have a lot of issues, but she had none. I just remember, people, vegetarian, vegan does not mean healthy. All right. Most of the people call vegetarian and vegan is junk food. It's highly processed junk food. We're talking about, going to the produce section and mixing in a bowl and being creative with it and not processing it too much. And getting the fiber in your system, because your gut flora is what, 3/4 of your immune system, and its main food source is fiber.
Yeah, and the flora also produce B vitamins. And the B vitamins are needed again for methylation because it forms SAMe, and that breaks down excess estrogen in the liver. So there's other factors that the flora do. A lot of people they overlook the flora, but yeah, there's immunity, there's the B vitamin formation, there's protection against fungal candida because it keeps it in the benign yeast form. The gut flora will produce bactericides and peroxide stuff and acids that control bad bacteria. So yeah, the gut flora is extremely important for a lot of reasons.
The main food source is fiber. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, got to feed the flora. I mean, cultured foods and stuff are great to an extent, but they're limited in the number of strains of species of bacteria. So they're good for a jump start if you've been on antibiotics or whatever, but for the long term, fibers.
You just brought up an important thing, antibiotics. Most women at that age they get sick, they get antibiotics, right? Or they go to their dentist, antibiotics. They go to a doctor, antibiotics. And that wipes out your flora, your immune system. And it could take 10 years to get it back to if you ever get it back the way it was. It's not an easy fix, but antibiotics is a huge reason for hormone imbalance, especially if your liver is messed up and your gut flora isn't. I mean, the biggest downfall of women is bread and cheese. Try to get them off of that. It's like trying to get them off of heroin.
And chocolate.
Yeah. What bread and cheese on a daily level, what do they give cows to make them fat, to make milk? Estrogen. Estrogen to make them fat, and then they keep the cows pregnant all the time with estrogen so they can keep making milk. And that's what cheese is made of. That's what dairy. Women love dairy. They go, I eat yogurt. Yeah, well, yogurt is. And you've said this in a previous video how it's not even alive anymore.
Yeah.
If it was, it would be exploding on the shelf.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people that when they talk about like milk and beef and stuff, they think that I'm getting organic, so therefore
grass fed.
Yeah, I'm not getting the estrogens and stuff. I said, yes, you are. You're still getting the estrogens because the animal produces hormones,
right? And
that goes into the fat that's in the meat. So,
and what is it? It's a 2,000-pound animal. It has hormones that makes a 2,000-pound animal. We are not a 2,000-pound animal. Yeah. So even if it's grass-fed and it's all natural and it lived in the woods, you're eating an animal that naturally has hormones that make a 2,000-pound animal. And if it is raised on a farm, they usually give them some kind of estrogen just so they can get fat faster, or in the case of dairy, they have to give it estrogen so it stays pregnant so they can keep making milk. You can't avoid the estrogen thing. So you got that. And on the other hand, you got your bread. Now you got your yeast going out of control, your diabetes, your insulin levels are going through the roof. You're probably snacking all day on this stuff. You're eating crackers and chips. And
we got to keep in mind, too, that a lot of these women are freaking out over phytoestrogens because they're so afraid of those when they're 200 to 400 times weaker than the body's own estrogen, yet these animal estrogens like cow estrogen and stuff can be hundreds to thousands of times stronger than a human estrogen. So why are we worried about these phytoestrogens over here, not worried about these estrogens over here?
Well, because they hear that the carnivore diet made them healthy again and all that. Well, that probably means you cut out the junk, right? You stop the pizza and the crackers and the bread.
Yeah. A couple tips real quick I can give the women real fast. Well, first of all, if they want to check their thyroid, don't rely on lab tests. The lab tests are terrible as far as thyroid goes. There are two reasons for that. Is one, when you're under a higher metabolic demand, your thyroid is going to go up temporarily. That includes stress. When you're going to the doctor, you're fighting traffic and all this. You're thinking about the doctor bill. Then they're going to stick you with a needle. Most people are needle phobic. All that stress kicks your thyroid hormone levels up. So even if you're subnormal normally, all that stress is going to kick it up into normal levels. So when they test test you, it's like, oh, gee, I see everything's fine, but you're hypothyroid. Yeah. The other reason is that there's a hormone called RT3, it stands for reverse trithyronine. So T3 is your most biologically active thyroid hormone. RT3 is biologically inactive, but if it locks up those T3 receptors, you can't utilize your own T3. So you can have normal TSH, T3, and T4 and still be hypothyroid. So the best way to check your thyroid to see if you are hypothyroid or not, basal body temperature. Glass thermometer, you can get them wherever they do sell them still. They're just mercury free now. Shake it down, keep beside your bed. When you first wake up in the morning, don't start moving around, just grab it under the arm, hold it there 5-10 minutes, read the temperature, write it down. Do that for at least a week. You average out the temperature. You should be 97.6 or higher as an average. If you're running like 96, 97, you are hypothyroid. I don't care what the lab tests say, you are hypo. So that's one thing you really need to check. Another thing that can be done, provided you still have a gallbladder and you don't have a peptic ulcer, digestive bitters. The digestive bitters are fantastic for cleansing the liver. When you put them on your tongue, not on the tongue, and you go to swallow, the bitter receptors back here in the back of the tongue, it's going to stimulate a nerve called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve branches off, covers various things, but among other things, it will stimulate the liver to cleanse, so it can do a better job of breaking down those excess estrogens into the metabolites. That they call them digestive bitters because they kick up your stomach acid, bile secretions, pancreatic enzymes. So that's why they call it digestive bitters, but they do have a cleansing effect on the liver.
Right. Bitter stuff is good for you. It helps you clean your liver, lose weight, balance your hormones, whereas sweet stuff, which is what most women love, is now you're releasing insulin. It ultimately could result in hormone imbalance.
Yeah, the bitters are really good for dissolving gallstones too, because women are more prone to gallstones because estrogen increases cholesterol going into the bile, so it supersaturates the bile. Progesterone is a smooth muscle relaxant, so it prevents the gallbladder from properly squeezing that out, so it ends up concentrating, precipitating out as gallstones. So the bitters will increase the bile, actually dissolve the gallstones, but that's where it goes back to, if you don't have a gallbladder, bad idea.
I get it. It's emails, sometimes people say, what do I do when you don't have a gallbladder anymore? I mean, I say take lecithin and aloe vera or something, but...
Yeah, just avoid the bitters in that case. And same thing with peptic ulcer, because you don't want to increase the stomach acid levels of the peptic ulcer until that's treated. But otherwise, the bitters, they do take a little getting used to. I mean, most people aren't used to bitter taste.
Yeah.
Europe, they're big over in Europe.
So what do people who don't have a gallbladder anymore, what do they do?
Suffer. They end up with chronic diarrhea, because normally the way things work is when you ingest the fats, there's a hormone called CCK, I'm trying to say it, cytokinin. I'm going to try to pronounce it. Anyways, the gallbladder will store your bile, and in response to the CCK, it squirts out little bits of the bile at a time, because bile is caustic, so you don't want large amounts at one time. So it's like squirt, squirt, and that helps with the absorption of the fats. It's an emulsifier. But without the gallbladder, what ends up happening is all this bile is being dumped out of the liver into the intestines, and again, it's caustic, so it chemically burns the intestinal wall, and that increases peristalsis and draws moisture into the intestines, so you end up with chronic diarrhea. So the best thing you can do in that case, things to soothe the intestines, marshmallow, slippery elm, chia seed, things like that to kind of coat.
Oh, the gel from the chia, yeah.
Yeah, that way you're coating that intestine to prevent it from burning the walls. Anti-inflammatories, licorice root, again, yucca root are both really good. They'll cut down the inflammation, because people who've had their gallbladder removed have a much, much higher incidence of colon cancer because of that bile dumping burning the intestinal wall.
We could go on forever with all the different side effects of not having a healthy diet and lifestyle. But hopefully people you're getting an idea, folks? You're getting kind of like the gist here? Hopefully. Change your ways a little bit. Thanks, James.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate you. It's like a tag team here. Well, hopefully we'll see you again soon. Good luck on your endeavors, and hopefully we'll see you again because people love you and the inspiration you give. So thanks for coming. I appreciate it. And we'll see you again next week with something. Stay healthy.